Hej allihopa och välkommen till Pengaflödet-podcasten. Mitt namn är Emily.
Och mitt namn är Anna.
Vi håller på med fastighetsinvesteringar i Storbritannien. Och den här podden kommer handla om just detta och vi kommer varje vecka ta upp relevanta ämnen och intervjua personer som vi finner inspirerande.
Hej och välkomna till Pengaflödet-podcasten. Idag har vi Harriet. How is it, Harriet?
It's good, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. How is UK?
Today, even though it's technically still summer, it is very cold and very wet.
And you're based in Hull, right?
Yeah, we're based in Hull, which is or just outside Hull, which is Yorkshire.
Okay. So tell me about your background, because you are a former solicitor, if I'm right?
You are correct, yes. So my background is that myself and my husband started investing in properties nearly 35 years ago when we were very young. I fell in love with property, love everything property. So for my sins, I went and did a law degree, specialising in property. I then qualified as a solicitor back in 1993, specialised in property again, commercial and residential, alongside doing our property portfolio at the same time. But then I sold that business in 2004 and fully retired as a solicitor in 2011, and have been concentrating on the property and property training and ever since, really.
Yeah, and that's where I met you, through the property training. Me and Emily met you, I think it was December, end of November, commercial.
That's right, in the commercial course. I should say also personally, we've got two grown-up children. We're in the 30s, and during lockdown, we got our 6th grandchild. So we have 6 grandchildren now. Yeah, he arrived during COVID lockdown.
Wow, how was that then?
I think it was wasn't great for our daughter-in-law because she had to be in hospital on her own. But for us, another one pops out, so it was easy for us.
Is that also why you retired? Because you wanted to be with your children and grandchildren?
Now, at this point, I should really say yes, shouldn't I? But actually, no. It was more to do with the fact our children had grown up and got married and left home, and we wanted to do some travelling. So we went travelling, lived in Bangkok for 9 months, lived in America for 9 months, went to Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, did a lot of travelling. So that was why go travelling while we could.
Okay. So I brought you on because, first of all, you have an interesting background, plus you've been doing property for 35 years, if I recall it correct. And me and Emily went the course and got very mind blown by the commercial, and I thought this would be perfect for the listeners to listen. So what type of commercial strategies can you do with commercial?
Okay, well, the reason I love commercial is the reason why I also love being a commercial property solicitor, is because there is such a wide breadth of opportunities, really. So if you keep it simple to start with, you can look for commercial properties that are currently commercial. So traditionally, you may be looking, if you could, maybe an old office block, you maybe could be looking for something that's retail at the moment, something that was more what I would say consumer driven. And those are sort of things that either you can keep as purely commercial. We'll talk about COVID and things and the changing circumstances in a minute. So you can keep this purely commercial. You can buy a shop, renovate it, flip it, and keep it as a shop. Or you can look at converting it to residential or part residential. So you can have something purely commercial. You can have something that's commercial and residential, so it's mixed use. But another area that most sort of untrained property investors don't look at, and is a massive opportunity, is this commercial, which is the industrial side, warehouse units, way easier to do than any residential or any bricks and mortar commercial shops, etc. Because if you think about all the trades out there, you think about all the businesses that need a space, it's a great opportunity that nobody else is looking at. So commercial is really quite wide, really. and it can bring in an element of residential as well.
So that's why you like it, because it's wide.
Yeah, it's wide. You're not restricted. You're not there with everybody else looking for that magic buy-to-let or that magic HMO. You're not even on the same websites. So from that aspect, it can actually be easier because you're not fighting with everybody else for the same properties. And then when you do buy it, then you've got all those different opportunities, all those different exit strategies.
Yeah, and do you feel that the competition in the commercial market is much lower if compared to the residential?
Yeah, it's a lot lower because you're only really in there with other professional property investors. You're not in there with the amateurs, and you're not in there with sort of like Joe Public having a go. You know, as long as you've got your power team behind you. Well, you're not. As long as you've got your power team behind you, they end up often as well. They're cheaper to buy.
Yeah, but why do you think people have this? Let me say it correct. This thing that they think commercial is so difficult. Because I remember when me and Emily sat there, we were like, she makes it look so easy.
Oh, okay, this is why. Do you remember that when you did the course with us, that where we started by saying what are you actually buying? What are we all buying? And everyone says clever answers like cash flow and ROI and everything, but it's not. Yeah. It isn't. The simple answer is we're actually buying land. We're buying lands. That's what we're doing. We're land banking. Now, just because historically somebody put a house on it or a shop, it's pretty irrelevant to us. So people think that if they buy a house, or if they buy a house to renovate for a buy-to-let, for a HMO, people think that's one method, that's one set of laws, that's one thing I have to do. And then they think if I'm buying an industrial unit or I'm buying a retail shop, it's a completely new set of laws and a whole new set of things to learn. But it's not. It's identical. Conveyancing process is the same. The mortgage application is pretty much the same. The checks done by your solicitor are pretty much the same. There's a few differences which we'll come to in a minute, but it's exactly the same. But I'm careful how I answer this. But okay, if I put my solicitor's hat back on and you came to me and you said you were buying a house, I'd charge you £500. But you come to me and you say you're buying a commercial property, I'm going to charge you £1,000. So as professionals, lawyers, accountants, trainers, mentors, whoever it may be, you can charge people more with commercial. So it's got like a mist in front of it. So clever. But actually, it's just the same. It's just the same. You have to learn a few more terminologies, but we did it in the 3 days, didn't we? I think it wasn't difficult. It wasn't difficult to learn a bit more terminologies.
No.
It really wasn't. But you can charge more, can't you, if it's fancy?
Yeah. So why do you prefer commercial instead of residential then?
I don't think it's instead of. I think it's I find it exciting, creative to look at a building, ignore what it is, completely ignore what it is, and consider what can I do with it. And it could be actually that building actually converts to 100% residential. Or it could be a residential building that's got an opportunity to convert to commercial. One of the things with COVID, you've got the growth now of people working from home more, but people are going to need more pod offices because you still need a place to go. Now that could be a big old 10-bedroomed, massive detached house that someone converts into pod offices. It works just the same. So it's not a case of commercial versus residential. It's a case of looking at things differently, looking at, okay, you look at a property, what can I do with it? So it's not a case of versus really. It's a case of there's more opportunities. Yeah.
And have you done a lot, like, okay, let's say if you, now you mentioned this versus, so commercial to residential versus normal commercial. What's your take on that?
Okay, then, right. So if you look at normal, just buy something commercial and keep it commercial.
Yeah.
In the long run, it can be a much more easier investment. So if you buy something, let's just say it's that ground floor shop with some storage above it or an office above it, and you can put in place a 3-year lease to that commercial tenant, or you could put in place a 7-year lease to that commercial tenant. And if you can do something called an FRI lease, which is a full repairing insuring lease, and so you can pass on the cost of repairs and insurance to the tenant, you can pretty much ignore that property for the length of that lease. So if it's a 7-year lease, for 7 years, it just sits there paying your rent. Whereas the average residential property at the moment, the average lease is 6 months. So every 6 months, you have to either check that your tenant is staying, or if they're not, you have to go find another tenant. And obviously in residential, you have to pay for the monthly operating expenses on the property. Whereas in commercial, very often you don't, the tenant pays it. So if you can have the confidence to do it, it's a much easier investment and it's much more hands off.
Yeah. So then I think, I bet that you have a lot of commercial in your portfolio. This is the other thing
you need to think about, which isn't just about commercial property really, it's more a case of not how many you have, it's more a case of making the properties that you have give you the maximum income. So you can have one property or one box if you like, but if you've got multiple tenants, so I don't know, you've got so it's one building, but you've got 2 shops downstairs, maybe you've got a bit of storage, and then maybe you've even got residential on top. You've got 5 incomes. So it's not so much how many properties you own, is how you can maximize the multiple income streams from one property. And you're better off having fewer properties that give you multiple income streams. Do you remember we had all the discussions about, could you put a drone landing on the roof?
I remember.
Drones land on the roof. Could we have mobile laundrettes, the big laundrettes? Have the laundrettes on the land on the side? Could you put a click and collect box? I don't know. Can you have electric charging point? There you go. That's just 4 more income streams. But it's just being clever, really, as opposed to buying properties. You don't want lots of properties. Lots of properties are hard work. You don't want lots of properties.
I remember that you came with a lot of ideas, and we were like, "Yeah, that's true. That's true.
All the little things. All those little things. It's just about being clever. Basically, we just all need to be. We all want to be lazy and do as little work as possible.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And what about how is it with the capital growth in the commercial if you compare it with the residential?
Well, interestingly, it's actually not that different really, because again, if you think about it, it all goes on the value of land and demand. So the capital growth is not that different really. The difference is where you're based. So if we look at the UK, the southeast and south of the UK, capital growth is good. Whether you're commercial or residential, it's good. But once you come out to parts of Yorkshire, parts of Wales, parts of Scotland, parts of the northeast of England, it is not good. In fact, it's downright rubbish. The way that it works basically is if you look at a property that we bought, let's say you look at a property that we first bought 35 years ago. Don't get me wrong, we'd have paid for it £5,500. Okay. Now, today, obviously we don't own that anymore. Today, if you went to sell it today, based where we are in Hull, it's probably worth about £110,000. Okay. So if you look to your lifetime, how long you want to own property, you look to the end game. Yeah, it's brilliant, really, because properties that we bought in the 90s, where we paid £40,000 for them, they're now probably worth £140,000. But you have to look to the end game in most parts. So that would be most of Wales, Scotland, north of England. Whereas if you're in the southeast, that property that you bought for £5,500 35 years ago is probably worth £700,000 now. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got to look. Unless you've got a rising market, you're not going to get great capital growth in most areas in 10 years. You're probably looking at 20 years. But that's why we buy for cash flow, really.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so but commercial is no different to residential, really. It's just the price of land.
Yeah, that's true. So what should we think of when we buy in commercial? I know that's a quite big question.
It's a big question, but it's a really, really easy answer. And the answer is demand. It's just demand. You've got to make sure there's demand. Do you remember when we did the course with us, we did that whole section on future proof?
Yeah.
We spent about an hour on future-proofing your portfolio, and we talked about in the future, if you ask a 10-year-old, what will they want? Well, I've changed that slightly now, and I've renamed that COVID-proof. But actually, in some ways, it makes it easier, because if you look back and you think, I don't know what it's been like there for you, did your shops have to close down, or did they stay open?
No, we were open as normal.
Oh, honestly, yeah. Well, I'm just jealous. So in the UK, most of the shops shut down, but certain didn't. Certain of them stayed open. So if you just look at what stayed open, I'm talking about commercial premises now. If you look at the commercial premises that stayed open during COVID, you've pretty much got a future-proof product, because it's open, it was needed. And it's not rocket science, you know, it's the little shop that sells your pint of milk, it sells the bread, it's the laundrette, bike shops stayed open, the good old one, funeral directors. We had a few that we can't say live. So it's subject to demand. You need to know. And in commercial, it's a case of very often with the commercial agent getting that select board up and seeing what interest there is. Yeah, so it's demand.
And usually, how long, you know, when you have bought a commercial, and let's say if you want to let it out, usually how long does it take if you pick the right strategy?
Well, you tie it in with the purchase. So when you look at the property to buy, and you're thinking, one of the questions that you have is, will there be a demand? Well, will I get a tenant for this property? Or if it's a flip, will I sell this property? And you're going to be having that conversation with your commercial agent before you even buy it. So when you're making your offer and you're trying to work out your offer price, to work out your offer price, you need to know what the rent's going to be. So you're going to be having the conversation with your letting agents before you buy it to say, you know, what sort of tenant would want this property, how long are they like to stay, and what sort of rent they're going to pay. And they're going to say, oh, well, I know it's suitable for a hairdresser, or it's suitable for a micro pub, or it's suitable for a takeaway. And at that point, you're going to work out your offer based on the rental agreement. And you're also going to say to the commercial agent, right, do you want to start seeing if anybody's interested, start putting adverts out there, you know, coming soon, newly renovated. Because what you try to do is get them tied up to actually enter into the lease the same time you buy it. So you're not doing it speculatively. You don't really want to have bought it, renovate it, and then put a select board out. That's not really the way to do it. You sort of do it with the purchase. And the other reason why you do that is, of course, your mortgage lender likes it. If you're going to apply for a mortgage and you say, we've got, you know, this company ready to move in, you're going to get easier to get a mortgage than buying a vacant property.
Yeah.
That was a long answer, wasn't
it? That seems quite sensible, that doing that way, because otherwise you might have renovated for a bakery and then a pub come in.
And they'll just come in and rip it out. Well, that's the other thing as well. When you're, you know, if you do residential, you have to carpet it and paint the walls and all the rest of it. Whereas very much in commercial, the tenant might be happy just for you to plaster it out, paint it white, and, you know, put some tiles down, and they'll come in and do the fit out what's suitable for their business. Yeah.
So then that leads me into my other question. Could you explain business rate for the listeners?
Yeah, so business rates are the downside of commercial. So if there's ever a reason not to buy commercial and not to have commercial, it's because of business rates. So business rates are basically a property tax that all commercial owners, it's payable by the commercial owner. So for example, if you rent a house, or sorry, if you own a house in the UK, you pay council tax. You must have a similar property tax, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's yours called?
Underhåll something.
Yeah, I can't say that with my Yorkshire accent.
But it's usually for people that buy the house, and people that lives in flats pay this ground charge or service charge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't. So yeah, so basically, if you own any property in the UK, if it's residential, you pay council tax, and it's normally between £100 and £200 a month for most properties, that's paid by the owner, or if it's rented, it's paid by the tenant. But if you have a commercial property, you have to pay something called business rates. And again, if it's empty, it's paid by the landlord. If it's got tenants, it's paid by the tenant. But the problem with business rates is they're expensive, and they're actually based on the rental income of the property. And so if just say the rent of the property would be £10,000 per year, you could then have business rates payable of £4,700 per year,
Wow.
which is a lot. Now, there's exemptions to that and there's allowances. So if a small business rents the property from you, they don't have to pay it. If it's below a certain size, you don't have to pay it. There's all sorts of rules to this. But the problem with that is if you're getting, let's say it was the, let's just say it was the hairdressers that you were renting to. If that hairdresser is paying you £10,000 per year in rent, but he's also paying the local council £4,700 in business rates, that means the first nearly £15,000 of their income has to be paid out before they even, you know, make themselves any money, which is a lot of haircuts to do. And the other downside of it, obviously, is if the property is vacant, because you've got a void between tenants, you have to pay it as a landlord. So it is definitely a downside. Now, during COVID, the government actually has made lots of allowances and waived a lot of business rates. And it's really topical here that it needs changing, because obviously a lot of the high streets in the UK are dying. Well, they're not dying, they're changing. Nobody wants the big shops anymore. And one of the problems is the business rates. So it's a really hot topic here. And we can see within the next year or two, or the next couple of years, that business rates will probably be replaced with something else. And then the other thing you can do with business rates, it is based on the square footage and the square meterage of the properties. So there are things you can do by creating smaller units. So maybe something that was once one big shop, it can be subdivided into 2 shops or 3 shops. So there's ways to get around it or to reduce it. But it is something that you need to check before you buy, because it's definitely a big downside of commercial.
So, then I have 2 follow-up questions. So, like you said, it's very important to check before you buy. Does this apply also if you're going to do it to a residential?
No. So what would happen is, if you're going to convert it to residential, you would, as soon as you buy it, you're basically going to go in and rip it apart anyway. So you can soon notify the council that obviously it's not fit for habitation because it's probably gone back to brick. And then you just let them know as soon as you've got change of use, it's going to residential. So no, if you're going to residential, you can get rid of it. It's if you're keeping it as commercial. And very often, whilst you're doing your refurbishment, you won't have to pay it. So it would be again. But it does look like the rules are going to change on that, because it is a big deterrent to, not so much to landlords, it's a big deterrent to somebody wanting to rent a shop. It's causing a lot of problems on the high streets.
Yeah. And the second follow-up question was the high street. You said the high streets are dying. Could you go more into that?
Yeah. So when you come, so if you've been to the UK, you'll see what it's like. It's a bit sort of the American version, really. A lot of our high streets in the 90s became copycats, so everyone was identical. So if you walk down a high street, whether it was in Hull or Leeds or Winchester or, I don't know, somewhere in Dorset, they all looked identical. I don't know if that happened. Did you find that happened, or do yours keep a bit of uniqueness?
No, it's still the same here.
It's still the same. Okay. And what's happened is that basically the other thing that happened in the UK were very anti-car, very anti... Yeah, so it's the same.
Yeah, the
so
same.
basically what's happened is that, especially the UK, is majority of people have gone to online shopping because they don't want to get public transport into the city centre. They're happier in the car. They don't want to have to go in the same single shops every single time. And you also got the growth, of course, of the outer town and the big supermarkets and the big shopping centres. Mind you, they're not doing too well now. So I don't think it's the death of the high street. I just think it's changing. And also the generation that went to town on a Saturday to go shopping are probably in their 60s and 70s and 80s now. I think life's just changed. And there's a really interesting, for those that are interested, there's quite an interesting report in the UK. It's called the Grimsey Report. If you literally just Google it, it's GRIMSEY. And it's just a blueprint for the future of the high streets in the UK. And it's just making them more street, wider streets, trees, pedestrianising areas, having more much more of the sort of continental. If you could think of it, Las Playas in Barcelona. As you walk up and down, making it more like that, really, so that every generation wants to go. So kids go and feel safe, and there's a coffee bar, and then maybe there's I don't know, whatever kids do, I don't know what they do. And then there's a micro pub, and there's only maybe, so if you walk down, maybe only the third shop's retail. So just completely changing the feel of the city centres, which is needed. So it'll just change. It'll be much more social entertainment with the occasional retail.
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting because, like you said, I don't know how it was in the UK, but in the beginning here, like in the beginning, but during my lifetime, it was
you're younger than me, I know.
it was high street, like you mentioned, but then all of these big shopping centers blow up. And like you're saying now, it's a lot of them are dying. It's just maybe one or two that are, still.
So it just needs to change, and it'll change for the better. It will, because once they've done it, it's more of it's just more of experience now. People are more interested in the experience, aren't we? And we also don't. I think everybody wants to be less corporate. We don't want stuff to be flown all the way around the world. We all want to buy local. It's just a change in culture, probably for the better, really. Less globalization, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And how is stamp duty on the commercial?
That's the benefit, is less. So at the moment in the UK, as soon as you buy a property for more than £40,000, you pay stamp duty. Whereas with commercial property, you don't pay stamp duty unless you pay above £150,000. So at the moment, if you're buying something for less than £150,000, which you probably will be doing, there's no stamp duty. So it's less.
That's great.
Yeah. So that's another advantage of commercial. And the other advantage with that one is, even if you're going to convert it to residential, if at the point you buy it, it's commercial, it's commercial stamp duty rates, even if the following day you change the use to residential. So that's another good reason. If you find something potential, it's great.
Yeah. You're giving a lot of golden nuggets in this episode.
Good. Oh, there's plenty more. I can talk for days.
So what type of commercial is in demand moving forward from COVID? I know you touched this briefly before, but maybe if you could go more specific.
The answer to that is we don't know. We don't know. I was reading an article this morning, and it's something like only 9% of people in the UK want to go back to life as it was before COVID. Only 9%.
Wow.
Exactly. Because of course we've had this lockdown and we've been forced to stay in our homes, and we kind of like it. And the other thing that was saying in this article that I was reading this morning was that I'm not sure the percentage now, but it was something like 53% of businesses do not intend to have their employees back full time. So what they're looking at is a growth area, is these shared offices. I mean, we called them pod offices, but it basically means in a building, you can have a coffee shop in there, maybe a bit of a yoga studio, a bit of a fitness studio, then some shared offices, maybe some shared meeting rooms, So that's probably going to be the growth, because people can't work at home and never leave the house because it's not good for you physically and mentally. It's not healthy.
No.
It's not healthy at all. So I think that's definitely going to be growing. And also, if the area is affluent enough, if there's enough money, I think there's going to be a growth in nice boutique shops, as in nice bread, nice this, going back a little bit, nice micro pubs, gym bars, but that's subject to how much money people have in the area. If it's an area where people are still working, they've got a good income, they will go to the nice bespoke shops because it's nice. If it's a poorer area, it's going to be more smaller, cheaper shots, but then but the real answer is we just don't know. But
No.
if you're interested in it, there's a report out on it nearly every day from something, because that's what everybody's watching now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The future, what it holds. No one knows, and
no one knows.
Like you
but
said,
if you're going to own property, you need to think about it, because it's a long-term investment, and you don't, whether it's residential or commercial, you don't want it to be sat empty, which takes us on to just be careful of the HMOs as well. Please be careful, because a lot of people now don't want to HMO because of COVID. They're probably going to opt more for a one-bed flat, maybe, obviously subject to them to be able to afford it.
Of course. I think that UK people will soon turn, or will turn, as Swedish people, that we don't like co-sharing, and you can see that by the demand of all of these en suite and etc. on the HMO, because before, what I'm told and what I've seen, they usually share bathroom and etc. and communal space, but UK people have started to be more private, or privacy.
I think that there's a combination of things have happened. It goes in cycles. So you're going to laugh at me now, but in the 1970s and the 1980s in the UK, it was all bed sits. It was all bed sits and squats and bed sits and flower power and all the rest of it. So beds. Well, it was. I'm not that. Well, I am slightly that old, but I'm not that old. And in the bed sits, it was literally, it was a bed, a sink, a cooker, and that was it. And all through the 70s, and even into the 80s, there was loads of bed sits. But then basically regulations got better, because obviously there were fire risks. There were disgusting fire risks. And then I would say in the 90s and the 2000s, you didn't see bed sits, you didn't see HMOs. It was flats, apartments and houses. But then what happened, of course, going up to 2008, house prices got so high that people could no longer afford to rent flats and apartments. But there does seem to be a change now back to sort of your one and your two beds, and it's leaving your HMOs with people that are probably on benefits, and you just have to think, do you really want them as tenants?
That was a great history lesson
wasn't it?
Me and for all of the listeners.
It's all a cycle, isn't it? The cycle just repeats itself. Repeats itself.
It does.
And if you can just be aware of that, it just helps you make some of your decisions about, because you want to hold your property for the next 30 years, don't you? It's your daughter you have, isn't it?
Yeah.
You want your daughter to be inheriting these and getting the benefits. Just think about the cycle of life.
Yeah. That was a great answer. So what's your take on conversion moving forward?
Love them. Love them. So moving forward, come basically this month and next month, our amazing government has basically changed the planning legislation. We're still learning all about it. It's something called permitted development, but it means that in buildings, mainly buildings post 1948, and it makes a difference because if you buy a building before the year, you can't do it. So I think it's about post 1948. They're going to allow us to go up a floor. They're going to allow us to extend, go out the back, convert, which means properties that we've been walking past because they're a bit ugly buildings, shall we say, and with no potential. Those are the buildings now, and that no one's buying, that we can actually now buy, and we might be able to convert to 4 or 6 or 8 or 10, let's just say 6 apartments. Now, you think about that if you can create 6, go on, count now, if you can create 6 apartments, that could be 6 buy-to-lets, it could be 3 flips and 3 buy-to-lets, it could be 6 flips, it could be serviced accommodation, you could do a lease option on it, you can rent it. So over the next 3 to 4 months, while we explore what these new development rights are, title split's going to be massive, absolutely massive. And as long as you do it in the right order, it's I'm not saying it's easy, but if you do it in the right order, it's brilliant. But where people get it wrong is they don't do it in the right order, so they pay too much stamp duty, or they pay too much tax, or they can't get a mortgage. So there is a method to it to optimize the mortgages you can get, minimize the stamp duty, and minimize the tax. So it's a nice little model once it gets going. So we just need to keep our eye on it really over the next 3 months.
Okay, so could you tell us the model?
We'll save that one for another day, because that'll be me talking to you for 3 weeks. The model is keep in touch with Harriet.
You hear that, listeners?
Subscribe to Harriet. Keep subscribing to this podcast, and then I'll come back on probably in about.
Yes, that's true. No, but yeah, that's very interesting. But do you think that then it will be like a big competition? Because during the lockdown, there was a lot of competition in the auction about, I think it was commercial as well, right? Or was it just
It probably will have been. At the moment, you've got to remember that for those people that are not listening to this podcast, the people who are not listening to this podcast probably don't understand the cycles. They probably don't understand that it's actually a recession and worry and fears is probably a good time to buy.
Yeah.
So at the moment, I'm sure there's a lot of fear around the world about all sorts of things, like we've got a change in everything's going on in America, we've got everything that's going on with Brexit, we've got the economy's not being great around the world, we've got Australia's just gone into recession, I think, for the first time. So everyone's feeling worried. I don't know why. I said this to you, didn't I, when we were on the 3-day course? Something's always going wrong. When are people ever not worried? You know, you look at a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, they're not worried. And
No.
so a lot of people at the moment are not rushing to buy because, well, no. So I should say, actually, at the moment in the UK, there is a mini boom going on because of pent-up demand. So now it's not a brilliant time to buy. But a lot of people won't take advantage of these new permitted development rights because of fear.
Yeah.
Basically. So that will hold them back. And a lot of people won't spend the time and energy to actually learn how to do it either.
And that's why it's good for you listeners that you're listening in and hearing what Harriet has to say.
Yeah, you have to do it the right way. You can't just have a go.
Yeah.
You mustn't. Yeah. You have to do it properly. Otherwise, it just becomes very, very stressful.
So what type of building do you need planning for?
Okay, so on the 1st of September, the government changed something called use classes. So every property in the UK has a use class. And all that means is that you can only use it for the use that's nominated. So for example, if you buy a house, and it's obviously a house, its use class is for residential, okay? Yeah. If you buy an industrial unit and there's someone in there manufacturing, it's got a manufacturing use. If you buy something that's a hot food takeaway, it can only be used for hot food takeaway, okay? Yeah. So if you want to come along and you want to change the use, so if you want to take it from the industrial unit to residential, you have to get planning permission for change of use. If you want to take it from the hot food takeaway to residential, you have to get a planning permission for change of use. Yeah. Okay, so that's the principle. So you have to get planning permission for change of use. If you want to do, now what confuses people is you don't have to do any physical work. All right, that doesn't include, you know, tiling and putting up walls and bricks and mortar. There's no works done by a builder. It's just a piece of paper that says change of use, and you have to get planning permission for change of use. Okay. Yeah. Then if you actually are going to physically go and build an extension or put another floor on, or you know, then you have to go and get planning permission for the works, and that's what confuses people. Okay. Now, so you get planning permission for change of use with no works are involved. You can get planning permission. So if someone's buying someone's got the home and they're going to build a massive extension out the back, they'll have to get planning permission. Okay. Yeah. Then the other one that confuses people is for the council to come along and tell you that it's been done to a good standard, that's building regulations. So your building regulations that you've compared to the standard. Now, under those three really, really broad headings, you've then got all your rules and regulations. But what the rules and regulations are actually doing is they're telling you when you don't need to have to go and get it, but they're the exceptions. So that's where it comes in with things like prior approval and permitted development, where you don't have to get all that. But the basic principle for your listeners is if you're going to change the use of something, which is where the money is, that needs a planning permission. If you're going to do some bricks and mortar, that's a planning permission, and the standard you do it to is building regs. But that's the good thing, that what's coming in October is actually removing all those obstacles on planning permission. So that's just an overview really of some of the terminology. And
by your experience, which type of use do you use? I know you cannot say exactly because it's different to different building, but is it office or pubs or churches?
Yeah, it tends to be offices really. It tends to be something that's been used, something that's maybe been used as a GP surgery, or sort of buildings that were like that, or something that used to be an office, something that converts nicely, something that's already structurally attractive on the outside, something that looks good. Maybe it was a pub or a bed and breakfast or a hotel. Something like, or the other one is where actually it's got a shop downstairs and it's got storage above, and then that storage gets converted to residential.
Yeah, so it's more unusual. Uplift.
Sorry.
So those are the most that gives uplift that you've seen.
Yeah. The industrial ones is if sometimes you might see like an old mill or a beautiful old building that maybe in the early 1900s was industrial. And people will strip them out completely and convert them into residential. It's basically the property has to have some character, or nobody's going to want to live in it.
Yeah, that's true. So when is title splitting good?
So title splitting is good is when the building is big enough. It has to be big enough to create 2 or more nice apartments. Okay. So it has to be big enough, and it has to be a property that someone wants to live in, and it has to be able to create at least 2 nice sized apartments. Okay.
Yeah.
And then those 2 apartments have to be worth more than just one building on its own. So if a building finished and beautiful as a house is worth £100,000, and if you converted it to 2 apartments and both apartment was worth 50,000 each, there's no point doing it because you haven't added any value.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So if the house on its own was worth 100,000, but each apartment fully finished on their own was worth 75,000, you've added £50,000 in value. So you have to make sure it's worth doing. And a mistake a lot of people do is they'll find a property and they'll squeeze in, I don't know, let's just say 6 1-beds or 6 studios.
Yeah.
And actually, by the time they've done all the work, because they're so small, the values are so low, it wasn't really worth doing it in the first place. So that's the mistake people make. So you need it to be able to create at least 2 really nice sized apartments. Yeah. And those 2 apartments have to be worth more than what the one house would be worth. It's all numbers. It's all a numbers game.
Yeah, it's always a numbers game.
It's always the numbers.
So the following question then is, what size should the flats be, or how many rooms do you?
If they're less than 35 square meters, you can't get a mortgage anyway. So probably 50 square meters and above. But that's just me saying that. I mean, for goodness sake, don't make any decisions based on that. That's what you talk to an architect about. But anything less than 35 square meters, you're not going to get a mortgage on. So 50 square meters, but again, that would depend on the location. City of London probably could do it at 35 square meters. So it depends on the location and your demands, but that gives you a bit of an idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. So what is a planning consult?
Okay, so that you don't have to learn all the planning and you don't have to worry about everything that we've just been through, a planning consultant just does that you appoint them as your power team, and they will put the planning applications in, they'll advise you, they'll liaise with your architect, they're often your architects as well, with the help with the plans, so that before you, and you talk to your planning consultant before you make an offer on your property to buy, because they will guide you whether you can actually use it for what you want to use it for. Because there's no point buying a property and saying, oh, I'm going to create, I don't know, 4 shops and 4 apartments if the council says not in a million years. No, you're not. So your planning consultant helps and guides you on your planning, and puts the application in for you, and they'll do any appeals you need them to do as well. So they're your power team members, so you don't have to learn all the rules. So
are they very important, or is there another way you can go? Like, is there a substitution for?
Yeah, you can. Well, it depends on the size of the project, really. You can. If it's only a small project, your architect might do it for you, but they're not expensive. Planning consultants aren't expensive at all, so it's probably worth having one on your team, because they're not expensive. They're not as expensive as the architect or the project manager.
And now I come to pick out your brain about creativity. How can you be creative with commercial?
Okay. Start with well, I suppose you start with demand, really. Firstly, you basically need to decide, it sounds really awful, is the area affluent, very affluent, but in reality, if it is, you're probably not going to buy a property there because they'll be too expensive. So what you really want is an area where everybody's working, or most people are working. They've got a reasonable income. They've probably all got a car and they all go on a foreign holiday. That's kind of your demographics. Is that right if I say that? So you want to be in an area really where people have got a bit of money to spend, but they sort of stay local. And then you have to look in the area and say, what do they want? What do they need? What's needed? Okay, so let's just say it's near a brand new housing estate and the developer's just built 2,000 new houses, because that's happened just near us. So if you're a professional landlord, you can think to yourself, right, well, what's needed in the area? Well, if all of a sudden there's 2,000 new houses, there might be a need in the area from some small industrial units, because the guy that runs the tile shop might go in there, or the guy that owns the carpet shop, or the electrician, or because you think there's 2,000 new people who just bought a new house. Yeah. So a little row, and then also they're going to continue working there. So maybe a bike shop might go in there, or an MOT garage might go in there, because they're all going to get the cars repaired, aren't they? Yeah. And remember, we always say, it's got to be something you can't do online, when you can't get your car repaired online. So if you wanted to go for pure commercial, you might think, well, what's the demand? Or it could be, it's a couple of shops you want to buy. Well, they're going to need a hairdressers, aren't they? They're going to need a barber's. They're going to need a shop to buy their milk when they're late and a bottle of wine. So you think about the area, really, and then you look for the property. Yeah. Because if you look for the property first, all you're doing is kidding yourself that someone will rent it. Yeah. You've got to kind of look at the area. Now, if it's a very, very poor area where actually incomes are really low and nobody owns their own car, then actually probably what you're going to be having is the laundrette, or the bigger convenience store that sells everything, because they can't afford to drive to the big shop. Could have, do you have pound shops? Yeah, we have. Yeah, so it could be a pound shop, could be a charity shop. Do you see what I mean? So you look, what does the area, definitely efficient, if you're from Hull, it's definitely a fish and chip shop. Takeaway. You just look, you got to think, when you're doing this, you've got to forget ROI, and you've got to forget cash flow, and you've got to think about human beings, and you just think, what do human beings need in this area, and can I supply it? And now let's go find a property to put it in. Yeah. That's how you think about creativity in commercial. It's a bit different in residential. Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, just came out of my head, you can just go and ask people in that area what they would like to have. Yeah, and the people that you ask is the commercial agents, the commercial letting agents. Yeah. Because the commercial letting agents know who's looking to rent in the area, and the people who want to rent in the area, the businesses that know there's demand in the area for their product. Yeah. So what tips can you give us as international investors that want to do commercial? Because we are from abroad, and a lot of the listeners are. Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay. So obviously you're all going to be using sourcing agents.
Yeah.
So, you know, I told you before that I was an international mentor. Did I tell you that?
You didn't say it in the podcast, so
Yeah,
you can say it here now.
So I was a mentor for international students going on all the way back to, goodness me, 6 years now. So I do have a lot of international students that I mentor and I look after. And in a strange way, I sometimes think it's easier for international investors.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because you're not so emotionally involved. Whereas very often for UK investors, they want to buy because that's where they grew up, or that's where their granny lives, or so a lot of it is the relationship with your sourcing agent. You have to be able to trust your sourcing agent, really.
Yeah.
And I know that's difficult sometimes, and you might have to go through a few sourcing agents, but it's finding a sourcing agent that talks like I do. So if you want to go into commercial, if all the sourcing agent is talking to you about is, well, you can get in, you can convert that to six studio flats and your return on investment is 67%, and doesn't talk about who's going to occupy it, or you know, what will happen because of COVID, then don't use them. Now in commercial, if a sourcing agent brings your property and they say, right, you can have 2 shops downstairs and 1 flat above, but they're not saying to you, and I've got this tenant and that tenant who will be interested in taking it, again. So I think what I say to you as international investors, everything, your accountant's the same, your lawyer is pretty much the same. You might want another limited company, but you could probably keep the limited company you're using already. You've got your bank accounts open. So it's very much having a conversation with your sourcing agent. Now, what you might find is that if you emailed your sourcing agent tonight and said, I'm looking at mixed use, they might love you and email you back in minutes, because most international investors ask for HMOs. And for the sourcing agents, one, they can't find enough, but also they don't want to give you source too many because they don't want to saturate the market. So if they have an international investor that wants a mixed use property, for example, part commercial, part residential, they're going to love you, because that means they've got a whole new area that they can go and look at.
Yeah.
And you're actually easier to deal with. You just need to make sure that, especially if you're going to do a mixed use with retail on the ground floor, that they are confident that you will find a tenant.
Yeah. Good answer. Of all of your deals, what deal
you wrote that one down.
Do you regret, and why?
So I thought about that one because I don't want to give you like a flippant answer. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, what I regret most are the deals that I didn't do. I can think of several deals that I didn't do because I messed around on the numbers when I made the offer. And so I didn't get the deal. And with hindsight, I just think, why didn't I buy it? It's just a really simple, boring one. So I can think of a property that's not far from here. And in my head, it was worth £35,000. And it was on the market, I don't know, I think it was like 38, 39, and they'd have an offer of 42. And I just thought, well, I'm not paying 42 because in my mind, it's worth 35. Now, so that will have been about 2006. So what's that? How long ago is that? 14 years ago?
14 years. Yeah, 14 years.
But to me, it feels like yesterday. And now, it does, though. It does, honestly. But those are now worth about 180,000. Yeah. And I messed around and got silly over £7,000. So there's a few in my mind like that. Now, the other one that I do regret buying, but there's nothing I can do about it, was I bought a property in Wishaw outside Glasgow, and I bought it about 3 years ago. And actually I did use a sourcing agent because at the time we were living in Bangkok, and it wasn't expensive. I paid 49 for it, but I didn't really check anything, if I'm totally honest, because we were overseas. And I just thought, oh, it's fine, blah, blah, blah. And it's been, can I swear?
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pain because I didn't really check the area. It's a nice property, and it was cheap. It was 49,000 and the rent is 495, but I didn't check the demographics. And basically I've had it, 4 years, and I think I got rent for about a year. Then the next tenant didn't pay rent for didn't pay rent. I had a tenant rent for a year, then the latest tenant hasn't. Now, because it's in Scotland, not England and Wales, is different regulations.
Yeah.
Yeah, you try getting them out. Took me, by the time they didn't pay the rent, by the time I didn't pay the rent, they didn't pay the rent. By the time I got them out, they had a year's rent free.
Wow.
And so that was like 4 or 5 grand. And then the tenant that I've got in now, they stopped paying the rent in January. So I served all the notice for them to leave, and COVID hit. And the Scottish government brought in emergency legislation in March to say they had to have 3 months arrears before you could serve the notice. Right, so I did. And then because of COVID, you have to serve another 6 months notice. So that's 9 months. Then you have to go to the tribunal to get them out.
Wow.
Yeah.
So basically you're like, I should have just done my due diligence.
So bad. I got in contact with the local councillor to say what's going on, and the councillor in Scotland agreed with me that their government was ridiculous idiots.
And do you have any contact with the sorcerer yet today?
Well, it's not. No. But it's not it's my fault.
Yeah.
If I'd have just gone on Street Check and checked the demographics, I wouldn't have bought it. So it was my own fault. At the end of the day, the only good thing is that when I rang the councillor, the local councillor buying back the properties. So once they've gone, they will buy it back. Okay.
Okay.
And it won't have gone up in value, but I won't have lost any money. I'll get back what I paid for it. Yeah. So my biggest regret was buying a property in Scotland when COVID hit and not doing my due diligence.
We're always learning every time.
And that was my own fault. That was my own fault. I should have just checked.
Yeah. So what book would you recommend to your child that wants to do property? Or investment? I
don't know. I'm not sure if there is a book as such, but it's more the way that so my children are all grown up. All right, completely grown up. We're in the 30s, and as I said, we've got 6 grandchildren. And it wasn't so much a book. I just think for me, when my children were growing up, it's more making them understand that they do not have to have a job.
Yeah.
It was more saying to them, and I said this with my children literally going back because they were born in the 80s, that that it's their responsibility to look after themselves, to not rely on the state, and to make their own way in life. And that at the end of the day, whatever they want to do, because it might not be property. Property's not for everybody. We're just nerds, dear. We're just nerdy. That you make your own way in life. And if you really want to have a good life, you don't go and get a day job. Yeah. And sometimes I think that's hard as parents, because we think that we have to tell them I mean, I do believe in education. I do believe that it's a very good idea if they can get a degree, if you can. Yeah. But I don't think there's no reason why. I don't see why you have to go work somewhere 9 till 5. So I don't actually know if there is a book that does that. So if there is, I'll let you guys share it with me. I just think I know that wasn't really answer your question, but I just think it's more the ethos of being true to yourself. And if you don't want a job, you don't have to have one. As long as you're doing something, you can't do nothing.
The only book that I can think of is like The Rich Dad Poor Dad, because
I think it does in many ways. But the other book that I have here that I did show, which is not necessarily property, which I think is a good one. I don't know if you ever see it. I mean, it's a very old book, but it's I'm Okay, You're Okay.
Never seen it.
Okay, it's all about.
Is it from the 70s?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I think it's from the 60s.
Okay, I might read it.
1973.
Okay, I wasn't born that, but
no, I know you weren't. It's just a book about. It's just a book about it. I mean, you wouldn't read it as a child, but you could definitely read it as a teenager or a young adult. And it's just about the fact of understanding. It helps you understand how you react to things in a certain way, and just makes you feel okay about yourself.
Yeah.
So, you know when someone really annoys you, so you just basically send them a nasty email or a text or a WhatsApp, or you tell them what you think.
Yeah.
It makes you understand why you feel like that. Or maybe you're in a situation where someone says something to you and you just feel a bit like, oh yeah, and you go like that, and you just think, oh no, I'm not good, I can't do it. And so you go through life with all these emotions, you don't know why you're thinking them. And it makes you understand why you're feeling like that, so you can almost get outside your body and say, oh, they're annoying, but it doesn't bother you in the same way. Because we make too many decisions in our lives based on how other people make us feel.
Yeah.
And it just stops us, and it stops us doing things.
That's true. It does.
Yeah.
So if you had unlimited with funds, who would you have as a mentor?
Who would I have as a mentor? Right. Well, I was thinking about this. And I was thinking, so who is it? If we look at this week or this fortnight, who is there out there at the moment that if I could have them mentor me, who are like, and I'm going to say of all random people, I'm going to say Nancy Pelosi.
Okay.
So Nancy Pelosi is the speaker in the US. Okay, and she's the one that tried to and failed to impeach Donald Trump. Okay. Now I quite like Trump actually, so it's not that, because what gets me is that lady's got such big balls.
Yeah.
Hasn't she? I mean, how does she? She's, there, because America is quite a male country, isn't it? It is. It's a very male country. And I think she must have so much, the way that she deals with people and how she's got to where she is, and how she's not scared just to go out and do things. I thought, if I'm going to have all the money in the world and I can have a mentor, and to give you the courage to do what you want, really. I'll have Nancy Pelosi, please.
There we have it then.
That's it.
So Harriet, if people would like to get in touch with you, how can they reach out?
They can reach out. So I'm on Instagram. So please connect with me on Instagram. My company is called Build Your Business Training, or BYB Training, but just look for Harriet Dunn. Contact me on Instagram, please do, and I'll follow you. Again, on LinkedIn, I'm always on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Or if you want to email me, I'll give you the email address, is info@bybtraining.com. But just connect with me on Instagram and I'll do it and keep stuff going. I'm always putting random things on there, aren't I? Often pictures.
Yes. But I'll put everything in the show notes, everything, so I can reach out to you.
It really is for commercial, even if you don't want any commercial, but you want residential, because of the changes and the opportunities from Brexit and the opportunities from the changes in planning. There's going to be so many opportunities in the next 12 months. There really is. Something that we haven't had before, really. There's going to be more changes in the next 12 months than there's been since the Second World War in 1945. They've ripped up. It's amazing. It really is.
What a time to be alive, people.
It is, absolutely. Well, I think that.
But thank you very much for having me on being on this podcast. And I think we need to do a second episode where you can discuss the end game of property.
The end game, definitely.
No one talks about that. So that podcast episode will be really good to listen to.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So people, don't be stressed and invest. Bye.